Good evening. This is Thursday, May 29th, 159 days until the 2008 presidential election. For punch and for brevity, just skimming the chapter titles may tell you everything. Selling the war, deniability, triumph and illusion, revelation and humiliation, and out of touch. Our fifth story on the countdown, the book by former White House Press Secretary Scott McClellan, perhaps the most extraordinary collection of revelations about a sitting president since John Dean was sworn in before the Irvin Committee in 1973, continues today to make the metaphorical ground beneath the Bush White House shudder. Its author is here for his first primetime, his first cable interview. Its title, What Happened Inside the Bush White House and Washington's Culture of Deception. In its pages, Mr. McClellan alleging, among other things, that the Bush administration used a political propaganda campaign to sell the war in Iraq, managing the lead up to the conflict in such a way that the use of force would be inevitable, that Mr. Bush, after vowing to alter the political equation, viewed and ran the administration as if it were a permanent campaign, and instead of trying to do it differently, just tried to do it more effectively and more insidiously and more secretly. Then Mr. McClellan writes that in defending the administration, although he was being sincere about the things he said in the White House briefing room at the time he said them, he has, quote, since come to realize that some of them were badly misguided. Scott McClellan joins us now. Thank you for your time tonight.
Good to be here, Keith. Thanks for having me on.
Who is more surprised that you're here, you or me?
Probably the White House.
That's a good way to start. That phrase, you since come to realize that some of those statements were badly misguided. Not to put words in your mouth or insult you, but did you lie as White House press secretary at any point?
Well, I did when it came to the issue of the Valerie Plame leak episode. Yeah. When I unknowingly did so, I passed along false information. I had been given assurances by Karl Rove and Scooter Libby that they were not involved in the leak, and it turned out later that they were. But they both unequivocally told me when I asked them, were you involved in this in any way? They said no.
I'm going to get back to Libby.
And you know, I mean, obviously other times, yes, I got caught up in the Washington game in terms of the spinning and obfuscation and secrecy and stonewalling and things like that.
I want to get, as I was saying, back to the entire Plamegate or Plame-Libby story or Plame-Libby-Cheney story. But as I suggested in the opening here, this, to me, in reading so far about half of this book, it seems like it is the Rosetta Stone for understanding the last 7 years of American history. And I'd like to drop you in and out of key moments in that time and tell me what really happened and what you saw. And I want to start more or less chronologically on 9/11. Not 9/11 per se, but 9/12, the day afterwards, the days afterwards. Did the president see this as much as a disaster? Did he see it as an opportunity, do you think?
September 11th attacks?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, certainly he saw it as an opportunity to look at the war on terror in a broad way and to try to implement this idealistic vision that he had of spreading democracy throughout the Middle East. I think that's what you're getting to.
Yeah, in the sense that it was, to some degree, used. That what happened after 9/11 was used in this country.
Well, certainly it was to advance the Iraq policy.
To Iraq, the Iraq policy, to advance Mr. Bush's policies.
Yes. Well, I don't know what the right word is that I would use, but it was certainly after 9/11 there's a whole change in attitude by the administration, and everything started centering around what we were going to do to respond to that. And several people in his administration, from the vice president to Secretary Rumsfeld to the president himself and some others, took this very broad view that they were going to do some things that they had wanted to do probably even before 9/11.
To that point, you write on page 127 about Iraq. Bush pulled Rumsfeld aside in a private one-on-one discussion in late November 2001, as author Bob Woodward confirmed with the president, and instructed him to update the Pentagon's war plans for Iraq. Bush made sure this initiative was closely held, known only by a few people who could be trusted not to leak it. But it meant that, in effect, Bush had already made the decision to go to war, even if he convinced himself it might still be avoided. In the back of his mind, he would be convinced on Iraq, as on other issues, that until he gave the final order to commence war, the decision was never final. So the war began when in the president's mind?
Well, not too long after September 11th, in those few months after September 11th, when he made the decision that we're going to take a broad view of the war on terror and that Iraq is going to be part of that. I think that the decision had essentially been made. We're going to confront Iraq, and unless Saddam Hussein does something that really I don't think anybody would expect he would do and completely come clean, then we were headed on a path to war. So I think the president, in a lot of ways, boxed himself in and left himself no out, partly because he was determined to go forward with this policy.
How did the vice president fit into this? Is the vice president responsible for the utilization of weapons of mass destruction and this kind of innuendo? I didn't really say that Iraq had anything to do with 9/11, but I've left you with that impression.
Well, I think there are a couple of times he walked very close to that. He went further out than anybody else in the administration. I think that the president was very careful not to make that in a direct way. But it's not the only issue where the vice president went further than others in the administration. He also went further on the nuclear intelligence when he started asserting with certainty that Iraq had reconstituted its nuclear weapons program. So what happened was that the intelligence was packaged together in a way to make it sound more ominous and more grave and more urgent than it really was. I don't think that this was some deliberate, conscious effort to go and mislead the American people, but it was part of this permanent campaign mentality that exists in Washington too often today. And it was taken from other policies and brought into the issue of war and peace, where it becomes especially problematic and especially troubling. And that's why I think what I get to in this book is so important for people to understand, so that we can learn from this and not make these kind of mistakes again, where we are rushing into a war that now is very clearly one that was unnecessary.
To that point, there is, I think, actual poetry in here, and I don't mean to vainly flatter you here, but let me read something else. Although I didn't realize it at the time we launched our campaign to sell the war, what drove Bush toward military confrontation more than anything else was an ambitious and idealistic post-9/11 vision of transforming the Middle East through the spread of freedom. This view was grounded in a philosophy of coercive democracy, a belief that Iraq was ripe for conversion from a dictatorship into a beacon of liberty through the use of force, and a conviction that this could be achieved at a nominal cost. A philosophy of coercive democracy. It's a marvelous phrase, but is it an oxymoron? I mean, can you have coercive democracy and sort of extrapolating from that?
That's a very good question.
Is that why we had your choice of words here is yours? Enhanced interrogation or torture at Abu Ghraib, at Gitmo, and maybe at other places?
Well, in terms of, I don't know on that. I don't know the full policy details behind some of those issues, but certainly those have tarnished the reputation of the United States in a very negative way, and I think that has been harmful over the long term. But in terms of the coercive democracy, that was, and you bring up a very good point about the oxymoron there, but that was always the strategy for going into Iraq in the first place. And I think that is what really drove the president's motivation to push ahead and rush into this. When I think that there were probably other options, well, there were definitely other options available to him. He didn't have to box himself in, but when he went to the United Nations, he said either he disarms and the UN, if he doesn't, then the UN goes in, or the Security Council authorizes it, or we will do it ourselves.